of go to webinar. This particular slide, basically I pulled down, this is a very quick overview of, we're going to see what's new with Revit 2016. It's a bit of platform architecture enhancement in the left-hand side, and in the middle we got structural engineering enhancement, and in the left-hand side, right-hand side, mechanical and or MEP enhancements in the software. Now, apart from these particular enhancements, this also includes enhancements from Revit 2015 Release 2. I believe most of you are aware of there was a update called Release 2 on Revit that was a special release for subscription customers only. If you have not installed any of the update Release 2 on 2015 version, these all are included in 2016 versions. Moving to the next slide. This is basically some of the, we'll talk about the core enhancements with Revit. That means this applies for all the three flavors of Revit, which is Revit 2016, which comes with building designs with Premium and Ultimate, and the platforms like Revit Architecture or Revit Structure or Revit MEP. So these are all, we call it a multidisciplinary enhancements, inclusive of all the flavors of Revit. The first thing we're going to talk about is a bit of progressive display. We talk about when we have is a real-time navigation support which is for pan, zoom, rotate, and orbit. That means in the previous version of the software, Revit used to redraw every element when we used to pan, zoom, and rotate, and so you might see some of the delay in displaying elements correctly, which is now they're making as a progressive, which I'm going to slightly show you in the demonstration later on. The next quick enhancement I'll be talking about is rotate project node. That means it's basically maintain the rotation of the annotation elements within the project if we use this tool called Rotate Project Nodes, which is absolutely one of the nice features on Revit 2016. The next, I'll be showing you a quick demo on as well, like this is new enhancement as well, like open seat view to find seats based on the view, which is a quick or very useful tool for every user, and having that basically reduces your search time or for making more accurate and readable documentation. The next enhancement we have in Revit provision enhancements. So now you can add prefix and suffix with revisions. You can in fact define the custom sequences, and you can delete or select multiple callouts. Next, I'll be talking about there's a new feature called selection boxes, which is a quite handy tools to select a particular element or particular area in selections and quickly create a section box or the 3D box that can be used for several purposes, maybe just for export or maybe for quick presentations. And another is 360 collaboration for Revit, which is a really nice tool they have implemented with these versions, that we can collaborate the BIM model directly from Revit. So you got a new tool, something called Communicator, where you can start communicating with the people in the real time, and you can start working in a cloud-based collaboration mode. And finally, as a multidisciplinary enhancement, would be talking about the rendering, which is what about there's a new rendering engine introduced with 2016 called Autodesk Ray Tracer. So I'm going to show a couple of cool features about that. Now, before I'm going to talk about architecture enhancements only, I'm going to show you the quick demonstrations. I'm switching my Revit for the screen. So this is one of the project. Basically, I can see it's there's one of the 3D view. Okay, let me just quickly talk about some of the performance enhancements. If I could just look at the options under graphics, we would see first thing there's a new tick box called allow navigation during redraw. This is something new to 2016. In fact, it was a part of Revit 2015 update 2, or sorry, release 2. Another cool features we have is you can have a custom background color now. It used to be like either black and white, or sorry, it used to be black or white in the past. Now you can select any of the color. So most likely, if you like to have maybe a quick simple background like a gray or something, that we can switch back. Coming to graphics, okay, let me just quickly switch back to normal, which is going to be white, which preferably we use it generally. And so you think about navigation during redraw. Okay, what exactly this means? Once I'm in one of the floor plans, we'll see if I'm going to pan or zoom, it's lots faster compared to previous version. The reason behind is the elements is not redraw fully even if I'm going to pan or zoom. So in terms of speed or performance, we may not feel the differences in very small projects, but think of if you got a large project, or if we have maybe a several link file with a simple view on one of the view, it saves a lot of your time about regeneration. The next cool thing I'm going to talk about is rotating true north. If I look at one of the site plan here, I've got a couple of text, which is a very simple text I have here. And if I'm going to use this particular tool to rotate my true north, let's say I'll rotate project north. Now what happens is basically they're going to maintain all the annotations or annotation elements to be rotated or linked to the elements. So for example, before I'm going to switch this mode, I'll slightly show you one of the cool features. Like when I'm going to ground floor plan, let's say quickly, I'm going to create a call out. Let's say one of this corner. Now in previous version, if I use this particular tool, the call out will be in the same place and it will lose the association with the elements. If I use the rotate project north, and I believe we all understand using all these features, so I'm just quickly using something called 90-degree clockwise. So Revit is processing to rotate the whole model. Okay, so we have got just a warning here. They're saying opening. It is a one of the errors. So I'm just accepting at this moment, and what we could see is basically the call out is basically following the same elements, as well as if I'm going to my site plan, we say it maintains all the text rotation as a readable, which is a really nice enhancement. The next cool features of 2016 is open one of the view from the project browser. So for example, if I want to see on this particular view it's available in which shades, I can just use this option called open shades, and basically that's open the particular shades, which is pretty handy for every users. One of the another nice features we have is the search tool. This is was introduced in update release 2 of 2015, which is inclusive of course on 2016 version, is the search tool. For example, if I'm one of the floor plan, let's say I want to insert doors or windows. Now when I'm clicking on the type, I can use the search. For example, I can search for, let's say, if I'm looking something like double door, so I can just type one of the text or something, they will start listing. So this gives a flexible way to find out a particular model from the properties toolbar or some other places as well. Another cool features I can show is the creating a section view. So for example, if I'm working with let's say this is a small area, and say quickly I will select this small area, and I'll have this option called create a selection box. What happens is they will simply switch that to a 3D view, 3D sections views, and the only drawback I have seen one is they will replace the existing 3D view or default 3D view. That means if you have a default 3D view, if you'd like to save, maybe you want to rename before you're gonna use this particular tool. So this will be a quite handy way for any of the users. Say, okay, if I'm working in a particular area, just want to create a simple section view. For example, I can select one of the elements and say, yep, just hit selection box, and here we go. We've got the section box for this particular elements. Another cool features we have here is switching from perspective to isometric view. For example, I'm going to create a simple camera view from this point. Now once we have camera view, let's say we'll expand a little bit, and anytime if I want to switch to orthographic view or axonometric view, sorry, we can simply use to a parallel 3D view. Or so that's giving you a parallel view. Or if I want to switch back to normal perspective, you can say toggle to 3D perspective view, which will change the view from to parallel to perspective modes. Please take note one more thing. If we have a 3D view, we can't switch directly to perspective view because that's only available is for the camera views only. So that option is for camera views, not for axonometric views. The next enhancement we have in rendering. So I'm going to open one of the view called strip. This is one of the view, and if I look at the rendering setting or rendering dialog box, new we have is the rendering agent called Autodesk Ray Tracer. This is a very new rendering engine introduced with this release, and this is one of the rendering engines that can give you a fully physically accurate result. The advantage of using Ray Tracer would be, since they use you can use a physically accurate materials and lights, and you can have the output as physically accurate rendering. That means Mental Ray can produce physically accurate, but you can tweak to achieve photorealistic rendering, whereas Ray Tracer, they will be more focusing on creating a physically accurate rendering. The difference would be there are a couple of advantages of using Autodesk Revit. For example, I have simply rendered a couple of sorts. So I'm going to open one of the sheets here. I can show you the two different results. One of the top rendering is using mental ray. I've used a setting high. It has taken around 4 minutes to render with resolution of 1300 by 500. At the bottom, I've used Autodesk Revit high. With high setting, that has only was rendered in 2 minutes time. So it's almost half of it. It's very difficult to say it's going to be half all the times because it depends on the material types, the light types, etc. All complexity of the geometry. The advantage of using Autodesk Revit would be it uses the physically accurate materials, so there is no fading of the materials. You might simply notice from these two rendering, noticing in the small area where there is, we can see the global illumination inside the facade is much clearer in Autodesk Revit, whereas in Mental Ray there is a difference. Another difference you will find in Autodesk rendering is the exposure control. For example, if I'm using Mental Ray, adjusting exposure control is dynamic. That means I can change exposure control after rendering. Whereas in Autodesk Revit, the auto adjust exposure is not recalculated automatically. That means if we're changing the exposure control, we have to re-render. I can simply show you one of the quick demonstration. For example, I'm just going to use a draft rendering, which is going to be very fast. So probably what's happening behind the scene is throwing all the geometry to rendering engine, and I can see just 98% is processed. And we can instantly see the preview, and we can see it has just finished. So what message I'm trying to give here is, like, for example, if I use adjust exposure, generally from 14, what we have, the setting we have is based on the lighting scheme for sure. And if I want to achieve a physically accurate result, we have to use default. In Mental Ray, they allow you to tweak. For example, I'm going to change this value to, for example, let's say by 12. And if I hit apply, we'll instantly get notice on the top. Say changes you have made to rendering are not shown in the images. That means it's not interactive. The reason why is because Autodesk Revit is meant for physically accurate rendering rather than tweaking or making photorealistic rendering. One another cool features I'm going to talk about is the energy analysis model. In previous version of software, so I'm just going to open one of the view. So I'm just going to open one of the model, a very generic model. One other things you have noticed here is now you can see the warning, and they start showing the version of release which the Revit was used to create the file. And you can simply cancel upgrade in between. Now, while it's opening, I'm going to talk about if in the previous version of software, if I have a simple, let's say a simple model, I'm just taking a simple example, but if I'm looking at analyze, I've got energy analysis. In previous version, you must have a mass model to produce a energy model. Now, with 2016, you do not require to have mass model. You can directly create energy model from the existing projects. So I can click on show energy model, and Revit allow you to basically create the energy analytic model, which I can just click on that, and we can see quickly they have created inside 3D called 3D energy model, and we can simply use for simulations. In the previous version, as I said, you're supposed to create mass model to do that. Now I can click on continue working, and we can use this model to send it to Green Building Studio, which if you are on subscription, you can utilize these tools. I believe you must have used in the past, or if you want to have some more information, we can help getting some information later after this webinar. Now I'll quickly show you a couple of enhancements with Revit Architecture, which inside the scheduling you can have there is a couple of parameters added with the floors, like elevation top core, or bottom core elevation at the bottom. Next, the nice improvements with IFC links. Now you can add rooms with the IFC model. So there is one simple toggle which makes elements from the IFC file as a room bounding, which I'm going to show it to you in a simple way. Now I'm going to switch quickly to Revit. Let me simply close all the views. I'm going to open or create a simple one file, a new project. It's an architectural. I'm going to insert an IFC link which I have created. So this is a very simple version one of the IFC model. The advantage, as I said, if I'm going to create a room or something, we will see right now Revit doesn't understand the room bounding elements with IFC links, whereas I can simply go to any type, check this tick box called make it room bounding. Now I can use this particular tool, and one of the nice tools we have here is called place room automatically. So we can basically click on that, and what happens is Revit will understand the rooms and they will create the rooms automatically, which is also one of the nice features with Revit. So these are the cool features I have shown to you. Now is the time for me to switch to Mark Kelly. As I said, he's also one of our BIM guru. So he'll be showing quite a number of cool features with MEP and Structural Revit. So Mark, I'm going to switch to you in a moment. Mark.
Hello, everybody. Just doing the transfer here, just hoping that everybody can see my screen. So what you should hopefully be seeing is just a PowerPoint slide there that says Revit for Structural Engineers. If anybody can't see that, just raise their hands virtually, not metaphorically. Anyway, okay, so what, as you're probably aware, Tajit and I don't come from a structural background, but we will cover some of the enhancements in structural, as well as looking at the MEP stuff later on. Obviously, with the structural stuff, if there's anybody who's got any advanced questions, then we'll probably have to have a chat afterwards if there's any specific points that they need to go over. But just to run through some of the enhancements that have been made. If you come from this space, then obviously this will all mean a lot more to you. Okay, so for example, there have been a lot of enhancements made with regards to rebar. So for example, when you're placing rebar in, there's an interactive view where when you start to make changes to the parameters of the rebar, you can see those changes graphically whilst you're placing it. One of the other good things is that you can constrain the rebar to sloped faces of geometry. And also, as you can see in the slide here, in this dialog, you can actually pick the rebar element and pick a constrained target, which is a piece of geometry, whether it be a floor or a wall or whatever, and you can actually use that as a constraining object and then set a constant offset to the constraining object. So as that object moves or resizes, then your rebar will adjust itself accordingly. As part of that placement enhancement, there is also the ability to go into a view and freeze the rebar in a specific place, and then make those adjustments and preview the adjustments as you're placing it. With regards to the actual path of the Rio, there have been enhancements made in that. I think this is based on feedback from structural customers to Autodesk. So now you've got a greater variety of actual rebar shapes that you can choose from. You've also got the ability to create a run of rebar that has a staggered layout as opposed to a regular layout, which was, I believe, the previous limitation that you could only do. Also, you can now sketch a polyline and distribute the stirrups of the rebar along that polyline, rather than just using a rectangular type of arrangement. And also you can specify the usage of the rebar. So for example, you've got circular distribution and so forth, and that will adjust the way that Revit places that rebar and shapes it. Another feature which is handy for people who are involved in production as well as documenting, you can round up or round down. You can force Revit to round up or round down the values of the rebar, which is good, obviously from an actual fabrication point of view, but also there may be specific standards that you have to work to with regards to standardized lengths. Also with rebar, you can now actually, the host itself, when you do actually host rebar in it, is now assigned an instance parameter, which is called mark, which of course is a unique number that's assigned to the host. You can then display that in schedules. So what you can do is you can actually say that, for example, that there's a certain number of hosts with rebar in them of a certain type, and you can also group rebar in your schedule or sort by host. So you can say how many rebar elements there are per host. So that's an enhancement with regards to actually scheduling, and I guess to assist with the quantity surveying if you're costing the project. Now also in regards to the visual display, this is, I guess, in line with the general enhancements that Autodesk have been making over the years with the way that things are actually displayed in Revit. But in large structural projects, when you've got large amounts of rebar, that would obviously slow things down. So there have been enhancements made with the way that Revit displays large amounts of rebar. Okay, so also there is an enhanced set of shapes, structural sections that have been included. So cold formed steel and concrete has now been added into the library, and there are additional detailed components which have been generated to reflect that additional content. And also, with regards to structural framing, there's now a greatly enhanced set of international standards that have been incorporated, and I believe this would tie in with the advanced steel, the acquisition or development of advanced steel. So this is all tied in with that same that same content that would be available in the advanced steel product. Okay, now for those of you in the structural space who actually do the analysis of the structural model, and I'm not actually sure how widely used that tool is, there have been some enhancements made in the way that Revit displays the actual when you click on an element, when you're in that structural view mode, there's been enhancements on the way that Revit displays the information about the element. So there's a thing called a local coordinate system that shows a, you can see here it's like a little gizmo, and it just shows information about the actual element that's been selected. There have been some enhancements there with regards to creating structural analyses of arced walls and so forth, and there have been some enhancements with regards to projected loads, or I guess that would be cantilevered elements. That's again not really my space, so I'm hoping that if anybody out there actually uses these tools, then that actually means something to them and they're quietly getting excited by that. Also, with regards to the placing of members, structural elements, there has been enhancements in the actual definition of where the load is actually going to be on those elements. So I believe that will make the documentation more accurate and actually make the analysis more accurate. And lastly, on that, the topic of the structural analysis, there has been the inclusion now of a reactive load in the way that Revit can analyze loads on the structural loads on the structural elements in a building. So I believe that's a new feature. All right, so moving to Revit for in the MEP space, I guess the big ticket item, which I think has been sort of getting a little bit of attention on things like LinkedIn and so forth, is the inclusion of the fabrication elements inside Revit MEP. There's been a lot of work happening behind the scenes to include this. If you're in that space, if you're in the space where you're actually fabricating things rather than purely designing them, then this is a big deal, I believe. So the idea is that if you're using the fabrication products, which include CAD MEP, SMEP, and CAMDuct, you're already pretty well invested in that sort of, well, you're invested in having created, either using the Autodesk content and then enhancing that content to create a library or a catalog of specifications which detail the types of piping and ducting and so forth that you use in your projects. So this creates a database, and all the fabrication products use that same centralized database. So in the case of CAD MEP, you can do your design development in there and so forth, and a little bit of clash detection using those component elements, those in the specification. SMEP is a costing program that allows you to derive, very accurate costing on the actual materials, the construction, and the deliveries and so forth. And then you've got CAMDuct, which actually then creates the laser cut drawings and so forth. CAD MEP also does the spooling, so spooling of pipes is done in CAD MEP. So the whole idea is that, as I said, these companies are very heavily invested in this. Of course, there's now a move towards specifying BIM projects, and a lot of these fabrication people are finding that getting the stuff from the fabrication product into Revit is a clunky sort of experience. So this sort of workflow now that they're going to have access to will hopefully give them a lot more freedom, speed up that process, but it will also, I think it will be developed over time. So this is not, I don't believe this is just a one-off type of thing. They actually, I think Autodesk development team has been given a bit of free rein on this one to spend a bit of time and money on it over the coming releases. Okay, so anyway, essentially what you've got inside the fabrication product, that image at the back there is sort of a screenshot of looking at the different fittings that have been specified in the fabrication database. When you go to open up or replace the element in the Revit space, you then have the same information inside the Revit space. These are called ITM as opposed to families. And you see that all the connectors, which is a very big deal when you're placing like an air conditioning duct, for example, or fitting. Getting the exact connector is a very, very big thing, because that obviously drives the way that the thing is constructed. So when you're placing the elements, you go in and you can define the length of the duct, for example. It limits itself to a preset maximum length, same with piping, which reflects the actual maximum length that the laser cutting machine can fabricate, for example. So because it's all specification driven, it means that you can't then specify a length that's not in keeping with that. So also when you're placing the elements, you can also, in the case of pipe and round duct, you can also use what's called an entry list, and that's effectively the sizes that are preset in the specification in your database. So again, this is a case of selecting whatever product entries have been created in the database. So if there's any changes in the database dynamically, if there needs to be any changes done, then because it's all driven by a database, these changes will automatically be reflected in Revit and of course in all the fabrication products. Hanger placement. So this is a pretty good tool inside Revit. I can place hangers, obviously circular, round hangers or straight hangers depending on the object I'm placing the hanger on. One of the interesting features is that it can resize the length of the hangers to elements inside the project, but also to elements inside a linked project, which I think is a pretty good feature, because if you think about it, an MEP or somebody who's fabricating will be receiving a Revit architectural model in most instances, and that'll be a linked model. So not being able to connect to a linked model is obviously a severe limitation if you're not able to do that. Okay, there's also a comprehensive library of standard cable trays, wireways, and bus, and also lighting track. Again, these are all reflected inside the standard database, but if you need to incorporate more, you can expand the database. So what it's effectively doing is it's getting from LOD, I think it would be 200 inside Revit with the standard Revit ducting and pipe, and pushing things up to the LOD 400, so effectively using the same level of data that you would be doing inside the fabrication products. And if you wish to, you can do the design development inside Revit, push that out to the other products like CamDuck and SMEP. I don't really see that as being necessarily the way that people will do it, but it's always good to have that option of being able to do it. Okay, general MEP enhancements, and I've obviously dealt a lot with the fabrication here, but I will mention something which I think will be a bit of a big sigh for relief for a lot of people who are working on very large MEP projects. You've got calculation settings that run all the time in the background in Revit with the systems. So as you're creating your systems, your duct and your pipe, Revit's constantly sort of calculating things in the background. And you could adjust to some degree, adjust the types of calculations that went on. But now what you can do in the case of duct and pipe is you can actually set it to none. So if you've already done that design development, if you're not in that particular, or you're just tracing out pathways and you're not really concerned about performance at that point, you can actually just switch off those calculations, which in the case of a large project is going to make a huge improvement on performance. Also, probably this falls into the category of why didn't it do that already? But anyway, so in 2016, due to popular demand, you can now have flow rates in liters per minute, which wasn't available previously. Also, with regards to snapping, there actually is there is an interesting development in snaps, which I will show you in the demo, and that's this idea of remote snapping, which I think is sort of something that's been around in AutoCAD for a while, but it actually can speed things up in Revit, so we'll have a look at that. So I'm just going to go out of the PowerPoint and just bear with me for 2 seconds. Okay, so we're into Revit World. We'll go to the dreaded PowerPoint. Excellent. All right, so what we've got here is a wall, and that's a round piece of duct. Nothing very exciting there. In 2015, you didn't have the ability to snap to remote objects. So if I was placing a piece of duct here, for example, and this doesn't just apply to duct and pipe, of course, but it will apply to things like walls. So if I needed to, for example, get the piece of duct coming up here so it was exactly in line with the face of that wall, sometimes that was a very hard thing to do. And what I'd often have to do is actually bring it up and butt it up against the face, and then come back and resize it, which of course is a real pain. So what we've now got in 2016 is this ability to snap to remote objects. So if I repeat that process, excuse me, and zoom out here or bring the duct up like that, you'll see the blue parallel line appearing, which means that I'm actually now perpendicular at 90 degrees to the face of that wall, which is quite cool. And if you sort of move around a little bit, you'll see, hopefully I can find something exciting. Here we go, there you go. So I've got this blue line appearing to show me I'm actually in the center of the duct. I'm not actually having to touch it to do that. So I think it might seem like a small thing, but I actually believe that's a pretty, I think from a minute-to-minute sort of drafting or designing point of view, that's actually a pretty big deal. Okay, one of the things actually I noticed in the slides there wasn't any mention of it, but I will touch on it. Autodesk did enhance the content with regards to terminals, and that is terminals that are actually placed directly on ducts. So there has been an enhancement in the content, I believe. The other thing is that I think the feedback was that the data or the performance information that was coming out of those terminals wasn't actually 100% accurate. There were some problems there. So they've now made moves to address that and make sure that the information about the flow rates and so forth and pressure drop is actually correct. Alrighty. Now, another thing actually that wasn't on the slides, I've also just realized, is something which is quite interesting. If I go to create some duct, what Revit's going to do, if I just click like crazy here, oh, didn't like that one. If I just click like crazy, not too crazy, just a bit crazy, and start to place duct, you'll see that what Revit's doing here is it's attempting to sort of create an elbow there, or a band I should say, that just takes up that angle. Now that's of course not the way you're going to create things in real life. You're going to have preset angles that you're going to use, and that would be a very expensive, and you certainly wouldn't, you wouldn't design something like that. So what you've got here inside duct and pipe is this ability to have sort of a preset set of angles that you can choose from, and then depending on what you want to do, you can actually constrain those angles to some presets. So to give you an example, so repeating that process of what I was doing just before, you can see that rather than Revit sort of trying to keep up with my random clickings, it's actually enforcing those angles into whatever those presets are. It'll pick from whichever one is closest to the angles that I've set. So that's a little bit of an enhancement to stop, I guess, that scenario where Revit sort of creates these sort of very small angles. All right, fabrication. I'll just expand this little window here. So what we've got is, I've just chosen from some of the specification items. I haven't chosen the entire list of specifications that come with the default metric fabrication specification that the product ships with. But I can go in here and actually modify that through this dialog, which I won't do. You can see that's the metric content that ships for 2016, and this might give you an idea of what's in there. So what I can do, for example, is I go through and I pick the specification that I'm working with. In this case, it's plastic domestic cold water piping. I can go through here and pick the pipe. I can pick whichever level, as per I would normally do inside Revit. Pick the offset from the level. You can see I got a little tooltip popping up. And so when I click and place, you'll see that Revit automatically snaps to that. Now when I've placed that, Revit has automatically added the correct coupler. In the case of this particular plastic specification, you'll note that the pipe itself butts right up to the end of that part of the coupler, and that reflects the real way that that pipe would actually be created. I've got a few other things. For example, depending on the specification, there may be in the specification different types of insulation that have been selected from. I can also go in here and change the length of that segment. If I go to create another segment, I'll just feed in a value there, and then I'll start putting in some elbows. As I place them, I can click on the space bar, and that rotates them. Then after you've placed them, you can also change the orientation of them after the event. If I go to place another pipe there, I've done something silly there. Let me just delete that. Try again. Sorry. More thumbs. Okay, it's pointing up. Excellent. So, I'm quite sure what am I doing here. Doing something silly. No, it did place it straight up. It just didn't look like it was doing it for me. Okay. Well, it did work. All right, so just a few other little things that depending on the way the specification's set out, if I place a 45-degree band, for example, and then place another band like that, you see the snap occurs, but it doesn't occur directly on the end of the piece. And what that's actually telling me is that the specification requires that there is actually a union piece that has to be added between those two bits. So that's just a little bit about the piping. And then I'll quickly move to the ducting. So again, pretty much the same type of scenario. If I were to go to an elevation, a section I should say, when I use the space bar in this instance, Revit sort of knows to sort of flip the object on a different axis. So let's drag that over to where I wanted it. Place a band in there. Again, use the space bar. And then I can start to place these in. As I'm placing them, or before I place them, I can define the connector, which is again, that was sort of what I was saying before. That's a pretty big deal inside the fabrication space, having those connectors correct. And also, I can go in and place insulation inside as lining or lagging on the outside. Okay, so let's just keep going here. No, it's not responding to me. If I go in and grab those horizontal, actually no, I won't grab them. I'll go in here and go to hangers. That's what I'll do. So in the case of rectangular ductwork, obviously I'm going to be picking a rectangular hanger. You can see that that's automatically sized itself up correctly, and in fact it's actually sized itself up to a linked file. So if I just drag the linked file up, you can see that it's actually maintaining that relationship. And in this case, it's actually sizing itself up against that slab because there's actually a floor that cuts up as well. So I've also, just before I came online, I placed in some ladder, as you can see. I put in some hangers on it like that. just for the sake of trying to, keep time to a manageable level. So the workflow is this: if I grab everything here in the model and then filter out fabrication parts, there's an add-in. So you do actually have to download this from the App Store. It's not automatically installed when you install Revit or the fabrication products. I can then go export Autodesk Fabrication. I'll just save that off. It's using an MAJ file, which is the standard file format that's used in the fabrication products, which means it's not an export process. It's actually just a transfer of file formats. Okay, so that's the actual file itself. If you use these products, then this is not going to come as any sort of news to you, but you can do costing exercises in here and swap out specifications to get an idea of the potential cost savings that you could get. You can do very detailed reports and so forth in the product. So that's just an idea of what you can do in SMEP. If I made some changes and then saved that, then brought that back into Revit, then those changes would be reflected in there. This is CAD MEP, which sits on top of AutoCAD. So again, if I open up that same MAJ file, like so, then you can see again we've got the same information. And if I was just to make some sort of change here, for example, then I could update that. Don't know how successful that'll be, better not touch it. I'll break it. So then if I made a change there, for example, then that change will be reflected through, just delete that stuff, for example, and then I'll save that off. So I select all those, hit enter, go back to my desktop, save that off. I'm going to overwrite that one. So the trick, I think one of the things that sort of has sort of confused people or maybe put them off a little bit who are in the fabrication space is that they have sort of thought, well, what's the workflow with regards to getting this stuff back in? Now, Autodesk has suggested that you make a blank file and bring it into the blank file, because you can't bring in fabrication products or fabrication items when you've already got any in the project, which I don't necessarily think is a great thing to do. What I would suggest is delete the fabrication elements and then simply import those elements, and then they'll come in exactly the right spot. So I think personally that's a more iterative workflow. And also, just quickly too, inside the product you can also optimize lengths of products as well. So that's basically the fabrication workflow, to give you an idea. So if you are in that space, as I said, I think that is something which will be very, very interesting to you. If you're not in that space, then obviously that will probably be of limited sort of fascination for you. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll switch over to Q&A time. If anybody wants to shoot through a question, please feel free to ask any questions. We'll just keep things open for the next few minutes, see how we go. I might just try unmuting everybody. I don't know how successful that will be. It might be might be a bit scary, but I'll unmute everybody. Hopefully, maybe, if GoTo lets me do it. It doesn't seem like it's going to let me do it. Okay, I do see one question that's popped up here, and let me just. Oh, a few questions. Good. Okay, we've got a few questions coming in. So what we'll do is we will have a look at those questions. Good. Oh, we've got a few. Well, do you mind if I do them in alphabetical order? All right, so let's just see. I'm just trying to get the dialogue up here so that I can... I did do this before.
Yeah, Mark,
Yeah.
there's a question tab in the control panel, so I can see there's a couple of questions.
Yeah, did you actually? I might just switch over to you if you're able to see that. I might just make you presenter. If there's anything there that's MEP, then we can.
Yes, I can see one of the questions from Sharon. Why ITM files, not RFA?
Okay, well, essentially, ITM files are the native file format that exists inside the fabrication space. And I know it probably seems, I guess, a bit strange to make a decision to use ITM. I guess what this is indicating really is not an attempt to try to take over Revit families. I would consider this to be, I guess you could say, a supplement. If you're in the fabrication space and you'll already be using these specification items anyway. So in a sense, all this is doing is giving an inroad to people who are in that space to be able to work inside Revit iteratively. So it's not, in a sense, becoming a sort of a new, widely adopted standard, and it's certainly not going to replace Revit families by any means.
But another question is, will there be any more structural items, Son? Sorry, we're limited to a particular time, so Mark and myself, we are unable to show some of the structural live demonstration, but I have taken note of your name, so I might provide a couple of links later on once we finish the webinar.
Yep, no worries.
I've got another question. Not really see a lot of improvements for architecture.
Okay, well, look, I suppose there's not really big ticket items as such, but I think there's some, I think it's a bit like 2015, there's some productivity enhancements there, some things that are going to speed things up. So, yeah, look, there was definitely a big push towards the whole fabrication side of things this year, I believe. But I think, you know, there are some enhancements in there as per what Danjit outlined, and also even just that snapping to remote elements. I think that's a big plus with regards to making elements.
Thanks, Mark. I believe there's no more questions here. Just before we're going to close, I would like to also let you know we've got upcoming webinar on 4th of June about 360 collaboration for Revit. So anybody interested, there's an email address on the PowerPoint. I believe everybody can see that, or please contact Cadgroup. We might get you send link for registration, etc. I believe that's all we have questions for today, and thank you everyone. Thank you very much for your time, and we look forward for another series of webinar in very near future. Thank you very much, Mark.
Yep.
And thank you everyone.
Thank you guys. See ya.
Thanks. Yeah.